Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast dropped today. The Intel with Greg Cosell. And I almost feel like there's like some symmetry going on with the Inside the Birds guys, because yesterday we had a great conversation with Jason Avant. And there were things that he said that started lining up with what Greg Cosell was saying about some things. And then today, Tyreke Hill gets traded. So to get more into all of this wide receiver stuff is a man that I'm sure is not tired yet of talking about wide receivers. Geoff Mosher joins us right now for today's edition of Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and, of course, InsideTheBirds.com. Geoff, how are you doing?
I'm great, Josh, and you're right. When you're an Eagles reporter, you never get tired of talking about wide receivers. Never. I mean, going back to the days of where they don't have enough because they had James Thrash and Todd Pinkston and they needed more, and then they go out and get Terrell Owens, and we all remember what happened after a year and a half of that. Then Reggie Brown was going to be the guy, and he really didn't become the guy. And then there was Kevin Curtis, and then so on and so on. So, yeah, I remember.
Well, don't forget about Freddie Mitchell and his wonderful dinner with Andy Reid.
Oh, how could I forget about Freddie Mitchell? Yes, absolutely.
I've had the good fortune of interviewing Freddie a couple times. I got to say, for someone who didn't do that much in Philadelphia, he's actually a great dude to talk to. I got to give him credit for that.
He's it's a colorful conversation.
Yes.
You know, it's always a colorful conversation with Freddie, man. He's all over the place, and he's very funny to talk to. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, if you want the nuts and bolts, you talk to Jason Avant. You know, you want the X's, you talk to him. You want Freddie Mitchell quizzing me why I played safety when I played football when I was younger. Talk to Freddie Mitchell.
Yeah, you get good stories with Freddie. You want the funny stories behind the scenes, you talk to Freddie. If you want the X's and O's breakdown,
right?
Not that Freddie can't do that, but Jason definitely is great for that.
Absolutely. Well, Geoff, let's get into this wide receiver stuff. Obviously, the big news today, Tyreke Hill traded for a first-round pick, a second-round pick, 2 fourth-round picks, and a 6th-round pick. And now he's the highest-paid receiver in the NFL. And you were the first person I saw reported saying that league sources are telling you the Eagles were not interested in trading for Tyreke Hill. And, Geoff, I got to say, I'm kind of glad they didn't, because trading all of that capital and making him the highest paid player in the league, that would have been something I probably would have criticized the Eagles for.
Yeah, I think this is a polarizing kind of topic. I think there are some people that would have loved the idea of it. I think there are some that would have said that the Eagles had the ammunition this year to bring that kind of a player in with all the draft picks they have, and that they certainly can figure out a way to spend the money. And I think people would also say that the Dolphins have probably tried to support their young quarterback with firepower better than the Eagles have so far. I think that there are legitimate arguments to that, but I also believe that there are very legitimate arguments to, do you spend that kind of draft capital and that kind of money on a guy who has some off-the-field history, who, had such an amazing year last year and such a great offense, but you wonder if he could be that. Look, he's a game changer no matter where he is, but how is he going to fit in with your scheme? Are his best days now behind him because he's been a dominant receiver for 6 or 7 years? Is he worth paying that top of the line wide receiver money, which is not what the Eagles have really ever done at that position, and even with Terrell Owens they didn't, right? So I think so you wonder their philosophy. I think there are fair arguments to on both sides of it. And at the end of the day, he's not going to be an Eagle, but the Eagles will continue to search for the right type of wide receiver complement for what they need and what they have with Devontae Smith. The Zach Pascal signing, as we talked about the other day, Josh, good signing, gives him a nice, big, strong slot receiver. In many ways, he gives you what J.J. Arcega-Whiteside gives you as a run blocker, as a big body who can help you in the run game, but he's also going to catch more balls and make more receiving production than Arcega-Whiteside was giving you from the slot. But we know the Eagles were in on a trade for Calvin Ridley until everything went down with Calvin.
Right.
We know that they were competitive for Allen Robinson, but didn't get him. And so we know that they're still looking for that outside receiver complement to Devontae Smith.
And one of the things that Jason Avant said yesterday to me when I was talking to him, Jeff, was he said the Eagles don't need another small receiver. They need a big body guy. And he described Pascal as a situational guy, a guy who's a willing blocker. But he said, when I asked Avant, I said, listen, the Eagles need a veteran. Is Pascal the veteran they need in that wide receiver room? He just came out and said no. There was no hemming and hawing from Jason. He was like, look, they need more. And I think it's interesting that Jason was very explicit when he was saying to me, they need a certain kind of receiver in this offense across from Devonta Smith. They don't need another guy who's similar to some of these other guys.
They need, Josh, a productive receiver who, in my opinion, that fills that X position that would allow them to move Devontae Smith around and get favorable matchups. And I think that guy, it would be very beneficial if that guy was a veteran. I understand Jason's point that Zach Pascal, I mean, we're not talking about a guy who's made Pro Bowls. We're not talking about a guy who's considered among the best. I mean, he's a veteran, but he only caught 30 some odd balls last year. It's not like he's going to come in and teach some of these guys a thing or two. Now he's apparently he's a great guy, and that's good high character, and that's important.
Sure.
But they sort of have a high character guy who's been in the league for a few years already with Greg Ward. What they need is a productive receiver who can come in and be a learn from example guy by how he acts in the locker room and how he helps the young guys, but also how they can watch him produce on the field and learn from what he brings to the offense. I don't know that Zach Pascal is going to teach anybody, great route running, great technique, great thing, real playmaking skills of that regard.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast at InsideTheBirds.com, joining us here on a Wednesday edition of Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, you can follow Geoff on Twitter at Geoff Mosher NFL. Now, where the symmetry continues is today on the Intel with Greg Cosell. Greg Cosell spoke very highly of Treylon Burks.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, Jason Avant also spoke highly of Treylon Burks, and they both made similar analogies because Jason Avant said, I see some Deebo Samuel there. And Greg Cosell mentioned, hey, I can see him being used that way as well. And I've seen mock drafts, Jeff, talking about the Eagles potentially being a landing spot for Treylon Burks because Aaron Moorhead ran that workout for his pro day.
Yeah, so that's another indication, right, that we speak of, that the Eagles are paying attention to a specific kind of wide receiver. And not to say that they're not paying attention to a smaller guy like Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson. They're paying attention to all wide receivers. But you're right, Moorhead led that workout, Aaron Moorhead, the wide receivers coach for the Eagles, for Treylon Burks. And Burks gives you that big body, natural boundary X receiver. But you can actually, as Greg Cosell was pointing out, he has some qualities that are Deebo Samuel-ish. He also talked A.J. Brown in Tennessee. And already some people have taken this the wrong way because that's the internet. But he Greg Cosell mentioned Cordarrelle Patterson as another example. And now people are like, oh, well, you don't waste a first-round pick on Cordarrelle Patterson, who, by the way, was a first-round pick. But the point was that not that he is as a player only able to do what Cordarrelle Patterson can do, which is mostly be a running back. The point is he is a wide receiver that you can use all around the field. That's at least how Arkansas used him, and they didn't just line him up at X and say, go win on the X for 60 snaps. They move him around, and he has the athleticism and that big body to hold up to be able to maybe take a couple of carries out of the backfield to catch something off of some jet motion and give you a little bit of variety to your offense.
And variety is important at this point because, let's be realistic, last year's offense was when they were winning, Jeff, it was very straightforward. It was we're running the ball and we'll get the ball to Devonta Smith and hope Dallas Goedert catches the ball. It wasn't like the offense was some dynamic thing going around, which I was trying to explain to people yesterday, Geoff, that, people, because Jason Avant was also talking about, the differences between like a Kyle Shanahan and a Nick Sirianni, and I think people, you know how they are. They hear something, they misinterpret it, or they hear what they want to hear. The reality is that Nick Sirianni's not Kyle Shanahan. He is not doing those kind of things with his offense. So if Sirianni's going to be successful, he needs guys who fit in with what he does if his offense is ever going to be more than it was last year.
Yeah, that's fair. Nick Sirianni has publicly said that he doesn't use as much motion and misdirection in his offense as, say, a Kyle Shanahan does, because for him, that stuff is to get a tell. What is the defense doing? I'm going to send a receiver in motion to see how the defense adjusts. Kyle Shanahan does it for that and just to give you eye candy and just has it as a base part of a base principle in what he does with his offense. Nick Sirianni, from what we were told before he got hired, and so you sort of saw it, even though the offense was one offense, like an RPO-driven offense at first, and then a run-heavy offense later. He comes from more of the traditional West Coast style. And in West Coast style offense, Josh, you can have that kind of natural big body X like the Alshon Jeffrey for Doug Peterson's offense. And what that guy can do is you see a lot of 1-by-3 formations, one, wide receiver on one side and then 3 on the other. And when you have that coverage rolled toward the 3, you see a lot of one-on-one coverage for the single receiver out to usually either the left or the right. And that usually entails running a deep dig, a slant, or a cross. That Alshon Jeffrey really ran only like 2 or 3. I don't want to say only 2 or 3 routes, but he specialized in 2 or 3 routes, maybe 4 for the Eagles. The deep dig, the deep post, and then occasionally the sideline route there. So that is kind of the backbone type X position. It's always evolving. It changes, but you see that a lot of from an X receiver in a West Coast offense. And you can find some guys still available or in the draft that can fill that position.
I'm not just bringing up this other name because he's a Penn State guy, but I'm bringing him up because of what Greg Cosell said on the Intel, on the Inside the Birds podcast platform. Jahan Dotson is a guy that I like. I know you like because he went to Penn State, but Greg Cosell had some very high things to say about him. And, I had said the other day, Geoff, boy, if the Eagles walk out of this draft with a couple defensive guys in the first round and Dotson in the second round, that's a pretty darn good first couple rounds right there.
Say it again. With who in Dotson? I missed the first name.
For example, in the first round, they get let's say 2 defensive guys. Maybe like Walker from Georgia and fill in the blank other player. Maybe like a cornerback in the first round. And then they get Dotson in the second round. If Eagle fans are out there listening, they should be happy with that potential because Dotson, like you mentioned on the podcast, his quarterback stunk at Penn State. Like he did not. So I love what you said. His catch radius is great now because the guys were so inaccurate.
Yeah, Clifford has helped him improve on that.
But it's true. Like there were catches Dotson was making where he's reaching like behind his head over to the side of him, and he's scoring touchdowns. And that would be a great addition for a team like the Eagles, where no offense to Jalen, but he's not exactly the most accurate quarterback in the world either.
Yeah. So different style of receiver than they've been, paying attention to. And we're talking about with the X, because I think Dotson would be more of a movable guy because he's only 5'11", and he's not, the biggest guy in the world, but he plays big. That's important. He plays big. He plays tough. So I think someone I spoke to kind of sort of compared him to Deontay Johnson from the Steelers, except catches the ball frequently and isn't afraid to go over the middle, things like that. So, but if he's there in the second round when the Eagles pick at 58, I'd be a little surprised just because the feedback I get is that teams really like him and probably see him as a top 50 type of guy. But you never know. You never know how the board's going to fall. So that would be to me the Eagles getting a player who's just really good at his position, especially at 58, that you just have him ranked high. Because again, I still think they're going to want someone who they feel comfortable with playing the outside slot as much as possible, and then whatever else you can do, that's great. But you're not hurting yourself by adding Jahan Dotson to the core.
Geoff, is there still a potential the Eagles are going to, not the potential, but is there still a chance, I'll put it this way, that the Eagles are going to go into this draft and they're going to do something that maybe we're not expecting? Because I'm still seeing mock drafts with some very, shall I say, weird picks for the Eagles, weird decisions for them. And I'm not saying the Eagles can't do those things, but between listening to you and Adam and everybody on the InsideTheBirds.com, and I feel like I have an idea of what the Eagles are going to and should do. But then I see some of these mock drafts, and I'm like, am I missing something? Is there's something up Howie's sleeve that we don't know about? Maybe.
Yeah, so I haven't seen all the mocks because I try to avoid them a little bit. Because we get all wrapped up in them for real no reason, right?
Right.
But I say this is something that Adam and I have said about 2 or 3 times now over the last week or two. And it's not out of any inside knowledge, it's more out of industry instinct and covering the Eagles for almost 20 years now. This has been such an active, frenetic, wild, headline-making offseason, and the Eagles have not been a part of that. If you would have told me 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, that an offseason like this was going to happen and the Eagles were, on the sidelines just waving at everybody like, hi, I'd be like, nah, that's not the Eagles that I know. And while I do think that their free agency approach has changed for the better since 2016, I don't think that we should look at Howie Roseman as not an aggressive GM. He's still aggressive. He has 3 first-round picks for the first time ever. He's into analytics. Analytics, in my view here, if you go look at the history of teams that have 3 or more first-round picks over the last 10 to 12 years, it's not very good. Not a lot of, most of those teams, you're talking about Cleveland, you're talking about the Giants recently, you're talking about the Jets who had 4 like a decade ago. There's another team in there that I can't think of. I think the Vikings did. You look at those teams and you think, man, they only hit on at most 1 or 1.5. You just don't see a team come away with 3 rock-solid players. Because once you get past the top 10 or 12 and the Eagles start at 15, the hit percentage, the superstar percentage, the Pro Bowl percentages go down and down and down to the point, Josh, where if you go look at just 20 through 32 or 25 through 32, there's a ton of misses, a ton of guys who are just average in the league. So Howie knows this. I asked him about it at the Combine. He's well aware of it. And again, he is aggressive. So I feel like whenever things are really quiet around the Eagles, it doesn't last very long. And I know people are disappointed right now. Fans are very disappointed. They think he's just sitting there doing nothing, that he doesn't have any real interest in improving the team much. I don't think that, I think that could be further from the truth. I think anybody should expect the unexpected when Howie has 3 first-round picks and an offseason like this has happened and he has not been a big participant in making headlines. So I don't know what it's going to be or what it is. As we get closer to the draft, maybe there'll be something. But don't forget, Howie has done pretty well even after the draft of making some deals, like when he got Ronald Darby in the middle of training camp, in 2017 when they won the Super Bowl. So I don't think he's going to be inactive and dormant for from now until the start of the training camp.
Yeah, Howie wasn't too thrilled when you asked him that question, but he still attempted to answer it anyway, even after you were trying to clarify. I'm like, Howie, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about
I know. He goes,
history.
Thanks for reminding me. And I'm like, well, it's not like you're the one who made the bad picks.
Right.
This is your first time. So,
but listen, Howie answered the question. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Audacity is removing Washington from their networks. They're no longer the flagship because apparently the owner of Washington was mad about their coverage of them. So,
now, would that be Tanya Snyder? Because the owner, Dan Snyder, is not supposed to be owning the team. Am I mistaken on that? Isn't he supposed to be, away from the team?
He's supposed to be, but apparently the report out there is that Snyder himself, not herself, him, Dan, apparently called someone up and said, "I don't like what you're saying about my team." And they were like, "Well, this is what it's going to be like. We don't want to be the flagship station anymore." So
good for the station, by the way. Good for them for not pandering and selling out.
But I'm just saying, at least Howie answered the question.
Yes, he answered the question. But and I definitely took from his question that he believes in the flexibility of having 3 first-round picks and what you can do with that to really improve your situation.
I'm also still convinced, something that you've been saying for about 6 months now, that the Eagles are, not 6 months, but feels like 6 months, that the Eagles are only going to use 2 of those picks. I agree with you. I think they're going to trade one of those picks and maybe get another pick for next year, because that's the Howie way, you know?
That would be the Howie way, wouldn't it?
He is Geoff Mosher. Follow him on Twitter at Geoff Mosher NFL. Check out the latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast, The Intel with Greg Cosell. Tons of great nuggets. We even scratched the surface on all the stuff that Cosell said on the pod, because I want people to actually listen to it, because it's an incredible conversation about wide receivers, because it's looking more and more like the Eagles are going to at least getting one in this draft, just the way things are playing out. So check that out. InsideTheBirds.com for more coverage on the Eagles and the NFL draft as well. And Geoff will be back with Mike Gill on Monday's show. Tomorrow, Andrew DeCecco. Friday, Adam Kaplan here on Football at 4. Geoff, appreciate the time today.
You got it. You know, Andrew will be at Penn State Pro Day tomorrow, so you'll have some really good stuff to. You can talk to him about Jahan Dotson, I'm sure.
Interesting.
All
now,
right.
now, knowing Andrew as well, though, he's probably going to mention about 5 guys that half the audience didn't know.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to write an article about that we're going to send everybody over to.
That's right, at InsideTheBirds.com.
Take care, Geoff.
Take care, brother.